Warning. Because of copyright, I can't show actual footage of these movies or play all the songs I want to. If you want a version of this with actual movie footage, please click the link in the description box down below. Alright everybody, time for what could probably be my most controversial list in quite a while. This is because overrated lists don't get very well received, not just because it involves unpopular opinions, but also because almost no one can do them right. Well, that's not gonna stop me from at least trying, and if this does become a train wreck, then, well, please forgive me everyone. Not everything we do can be good. Feel free to do a commentary on it though, if you want to. Anyways, I have a lot of unpopular opinions. For example, I think Inspector Gadget looks and sounds really stupid and I don't understand the praise for it. I love Cars 2 and regard it as one of my favorite Pixar movies, and I think that the 6 movies I'm about to talk about are extremely overrated. Now, there are 4 things that factor into what I personally think makes a movie overrated. How good the fans think it is, how good I think it is, how the fanbase acts, and how good everyone's reasons are for praising these movies as much as they do. And also, if there are a lot of people who agree with me that the movie is overrated, then that will make it less overrated. And keep this in mind throughout the entire list. But just because I think a movie is overrated doesn't mean I automatically hate it. As a matter of fact, there's only one movie on this list I actually hate. I do dislike most of them, but I only hate one of them. And last and most importantly of all, this is just my personal list. I will not force you to agree with me on any of these opinions shared here. If anything, I'd say that anyone who does change their opinion to match mine is an idiot for not being able to think for themselves. But I do ask you to understand my reasons for thinking these movies are overrated, and to state your opinion without being annoying. With that said, let's get this over with. Cinderella. How could this movie be on the list? The movie that's a huge icon in Disney history for how it single-handedly saved Walt Disney from bankruptcy and made it possible for Disney to continue making movies which led to most of the amazing Disney masterpieces we have nowadays? How could this be on here? Hey, if the nostalgia critic can come up with good reasons for liking A Pound for Gary, I'm sure anything is possible. While it is definitely a blessing what this movie did for the company, as a movie itself, I honestly don't think it's all that memorable. Heck, I'll even go as far as to say that if you don't include sequels, it's what I think is the weakest of all the animated Disney princess movies. Okay, maybe it's the weakest. I'll even say that I prefer the live-action version.
I am not kidding.
But what's wrong with it? Well, for one thing, even though it's advertised as not just a Disney princess movie, but also the Disney princess movie, it spends about 40% of its runtime desperately trying to be a Tom and Jerry cartoon. Not that this is always bad, but if I wanted to watch cat and mouse related comic hijinks, I'd put on Tom and Jerry. Not a movie that's advertised as the closest to the Disney princess formula as you can get. That's like if the Lion King were to just suddenly decide to become Roadrunner every 10 minutes. It doesn't match the Disney tone at all. My other problem with the movie is how forgettable the characters are. Don't get me wrong, Cinderella herself is likable, and I'll admit, I do like seeing her at Disney World. The mice are also likable, even if they are to blame for those previously mentioned Tom and Jerry wannabe scenes. But then we have the fairy godmother. She's not a bad character, but for one of the most iconic Disney characters, she's barely even in the movie, and even though she's had the power to make Cinderella's life better, she's been secretly with Cinderella since she was a child, and she just sat back and did nothing and allowed Cinderella to take all that abuse for all those years, and waited until Cinderella had lost almost all hope before finally deciding to do something about it. Then there's the prince. He is easily one of the most forgettable Disney princes we have ever gotten. But easily the worst of these is the king. He is literally the absolute worst Disney parent ever, and that's including ones that we're supposed to hate. The fact that he literally has people executed just because he doesn't get his way, even when they have no control over it. He is exactly like the Queen of Hearts, except male, and they want us to like him? When Prince Charming becomes a new king, I hope his first order is to have this brainless tyrant executed as soon as possible, because he does not deserve to live. Now the reason this movie isn't any higher is because, as stated before, this is the movie that saved Disney. But at the same time, this is the movie that saved Disney. That honor couldn't have gone to a much better Disney movie, It's made even more insulting since within a few years after this movie, we got Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan, both which I think are much better movies than this one. Maybe this movie was a masterpiece back in its time, but it just aged terribly. I don't know. But if that's the case, then when Snow White precedes this movie by over a decade and still aged better than this, you know we've got a problem. So to conclude, not a bad movie. It is better that it exists than if it doesn't, because I can't imagine life without Disney. But I just wasn't a fan of the movie itself. Yep, I'm one of those people who find Shrek overrated. Or as some people would say, ogre-rated. Now before you all grab your torches and pitchforks, I just want to say I do genuinely enjoy this movie. Otherwise I wouldn't have done that Squidward Shrek spoof a couple of years back. This movie is funny, subversive, and still understands that you need to be serious every once in a while. I'll even say it's the only one of the 6 entries that I like. The problem, however, is how everyone treats it. This movie was pretty much everywhere when it came out, and since then, it's become what many people believe is one of the greatest animated movies of all time, and also inspired a lot of other animated movies to cash in on this movie's success, with some admittedly really good ones such as Hoodwinked. But why does it get this much attention? Because it's basically the anti-Disney movie. I guess I don't have a problem with a movie making fun of Disney. They do have some pretty funny ways of doing this, especially when Donkey randomly starts singing. That's pretty funny, at least in the versions where they don't feel the need to pointlessly put an instrumentals into it, making it feel less funny and awkward. But not all of them are good, like when Fiona tells Shrek that after rescuing her, he has to jump out a window and slide on a rope onto his valiant steed who just happens to be out the window at that very moment. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Fiona just made that up. And there are also plenty of instances where they go way too far with it. It feels a need to not only make fun of Disney, but also stick up a giant middle finger at all Disney fans and basically call out its audience for liking Disney movies. I mean, the movie's first joke features Shrek tearing out a fairy tale page book and using it as toilet paper. Call me a spineless wimp, but as a Disney fan, I honestly feel offended by that. Another way they go too far with it is what they do with the villain, Lord Farquaad, basing him off the CEO of Disney and not only making him the villain, but also purposefully making him as pathetic and stupid as possible. I can understand doing something like that in a YouTube video, but when you shame a real life person this much in a project as huge as a movie, I'm sorry, that is just childish. Though, if I may make a confession, I'd be lying if I said that I didn't laugh at the joke where Shrek and Donkey made jokes about Lord Farquaad's size. However, it's also kinda hypocritical. It says you shouldn't be ashamed of who you are, while at the same time making fun of Lord Farquaad for being short. And if you ask me, just because you make fun of Disney doesn't automatically make you better than Disney. By that logic, if a toddler goes up to a college graduate who got straight A's on all of his classes, and then calls said college graduate a big stupid doo-doo head, then the toddler must automatically be the smarter one of the two. My next problem with the movie is Shrek himself. I mean, he's a good character, but he's not a good main character if you know what I mean. This is something that the sequel's improved on. Yes, that includes the third movie, but this one, I couldn't find myself putting myself in his shoes very often, and while I did sympathize with him at times, for the most part, I found myself sympathizing with Donkey much more than I did with him, especially in the third act misunderstanding scene. Third act arguments are okay, but when it's over a misunderstanding, it becomes really hard to take seriously. And this is the worst of them all, because not only is it supposed to be taken seriously, despite being like in the Fairly Odd Parents episode Beddy Bye when Timmy's parents said, yeah, having a son can be such a drag, is the exact opposite of how I really feel. But even though it was Fiona who said all those terrible things about Shrek, Shrek still takes most of his anger out on Donkey, even though Donkey literally played no part in saying that stuff other than, oh, he's the one she was talking to, which makes them great pals, and so that must mean he has to agree with every single thing she says. I'm sorry, but this is a scene where I just cannot sympathize with Shrek in, because his anger towards Donkey literally just comes out of nowhere. Again, still a good character, I just can't see him being in the spotlight. The movie isn't any higher because, like I said, I do still like this movie. And because I've heard this movie also has its fair share of people who agree with me that it's overrated. However, I haven't actually met these people, so I think it's safe to assume that there aren't enough for me to consider it an overrated paradox, as Doodletones puts it. So yeah, I like Shrek, I think it's a good movie, I just don't think it's worthy of all the attention that it's gotten over the past 21 years. Despicable Me. Here's the entry that made me extend this countdown from a top 5 to a top 6. Because I had already put all that work into scripting the Cinderella entry, but since then I found out how overrated this movie was, but still wanted both this and Cinderella to be on here. So, what makes this one overrated? People say it's the only good Illumination movie, but I find it overall just meh. I'd probably like it more if it weren't for so many unpleasing character designs, and Vector being one of the dumbest villains Illumination's ever given us. Then again, I guess it's to be expected from the same franchise that also gave us a villain who's like, face the awesome power of a giant nutcracker that chews bubblegum. But back to Vector. I don't understand why so many people like this guy. Well, other than the fact that it's their opinion, but I just don't understand. To me, he's just some Squilliam Fancy Son wannabe with nothing cool about him, other than his room and the fact that he stole an entire pyramid, and even then, that only makes it even more disappointing when we find out who it was that did that. Seriously, why do all the horribly unlikable ones get their own memes? Yeah, as overhyped as Shrek is, at least I could see where all the praise is coming from, and at least that movie had a lot to like about it, so I managed to keep my interest throughout the whole movie. This, however, while I don't hate it, there isn't really that much to like about it either, other than a couple good jokes and some interesting character development, and the scene with Gru destroying the UFO is pretty awesome, but that's about it. It's not a bad movie, but I don't think it's a very good movie either. Now, some of you are probably going to ask why I'm not bringing up the Minions as a factor to this movie being overrated. Well, even though the Minions are extremely overmarketed, I've also heard a lot of people who find them really annoying, so that takes away from their overrated factor. But even if you ignore them, this movie's still overrated. Well, at least the second one was much better, but overall, I just don't get how this movie became this beloved. Especially since later in the same year we would get a much better movie about a villain turning good, and that movie did not deserve to be overshadowed by this movie, because that was a much better movie than this painfully average film. And just how much everyone glorifies this movie, that is what I think of as truly despicable. Well, all I can do now is hope that the upcoming Mario movie dethrones this movie as the most beloved Illumination movie. No offense to Despicable Me fans. Okay, is it safe to come out and admit it? Only one way to find out. Here I go. I don't like Christmas Story. Uh-oh, the angry mobs are coming in already. Please be reasonable, everyone. I know this is a movie that so many people hold close to their hearts and treat it like it's the greatest Christmas movie ever. I'm sorry, I tried really hard to like this movie. Okay, that's mainly because I wanted to keep the angry mobs from breaking down my door, but I tried everything I could, but no matter what I do, I can never bring myself to like it. It got even worse for me since my parents would force me to watch this movie every year on the day after Thanksgiving, and that was not a good time for me. So you're probably wondering, why is it that I don't like this movie? It's not because of the over-commercialism. In fact, even before I heard about it being over-commercialized, I still wasn't a fan of it. It's not really one big problem that ruins it for me, but it's just that nearly every scene in the movie has something that ruins my enjoyment of the scene. I found the Triple Dog Dare scene more mean-spirited than funny because it features a child screaming like he's in very real pain. The elves were mean and unbearable to watch, and then Ralph's mother, who, while she isn't a bad mother, there are multiple points in the movie where she's really tempting me to call her one. I understand her getting mad at Ralph for swearing, but Ralph got the swear from his father, who says it at least 10 times a day, yet the mother, who has lived with him since before Ralph was even born, didn't stop to think that Ralph maybe heard it from him, and also because she literally freaks out in response to hearing that Ralph swore, but when he beats someone up until he bleeds, which is just plain horrific to watch by the way, that's treated like normal behavior. But easily her worst performance was in the decoder ring scene, because she kept demanding Ralph to get out of the bathroom because Randy had to go, even though Ralph was in for like, what, 3 minutes? This mother is just being an unreasonable brat. And while some shots look fine, others look like they rubbed garlic on the lens. I've seen movies from the 60s that look better than this, so what's their excuse? As for the rest of my problems, I'm thinking about reviewing it next winter, so hopefully you'll have a better idea of my disliking for it then. I heard it might be a generation thing, and that it's more so for people of the past generation than it is for my generation, and I would understand, oh, well, it's just one of those movies that everyone loves that I just can't bring myself to, but can't say it's overrated. At least I would say that, if not for how the fan base chooses to act about it. People act like it's a horrible crime to dislike this movie, and that anyone who doesn't like this movie is ruining their childhood. Then we also have how much of an over-commercialized monstrosity this movie has become. I'm also sick of how every time I go to the YouTube videos of the SpongeBob song Footsteps of Horror, about half of the comments are all talking about this song's usage in that scene. I am sick to death of that, and I really don't like having that song be associated with a scene featuring Ralph's mom being an impatient brat like I previously mentioned. Not helped by how that scene is followed up by a poop joke. My final problem with the fanbase? They got on other movies' cases for doing certain things, yet they don't say anything about it when this movie did stuff like that. They complain about other movies having too many subplots, but I could easily argue that this movie does the same thing, with Ralph wanting the BB gun, his assignment, the decoder pen, the leg lab, the malfunctioning furnace, the Bumpus' dogs. I could go on forever, baby! But easily the worst case of the hypocrisy is with the Chinese singers. People complain about the older Disney movies having racist scenes in them, and are even forcing Disney to completely change one of the rides that doesn't even have any of the racist elements from the movie it's based off, and yet they never say a word about this. I could easily say this is just as racist as most of Disney's racist moments in it, Ford actually makes a joke saying that Chinese people's accents prevent them from singing properly. I've only ever heard 2 people complain about this, and both of those instances were done in an obvious joking manner. Then again, I don't know why I expected when I live in the same world that says all racist jokes are bad unless South Park makes them, because it's South Park, therefore that automatically makes it okay. Sorry for getting distracted. It's just that, why is it okay when this movie does something racist, but not when Disney does it? Overall, I can see why people like it, but I don't see why people feel the need to call it the greatest Christmas movie ever made, other than the children's reactions are realistic. I won't force you to think any less of this movie, and if there's one saving grace I believe this movie has, it's the fantasy sequences. They're actually pretty enjoyable and they put a smile on my face. But overall, I'm not a fan of this movie. I don't appreciate being treated like the bad guy for having a different opinion, and I just don't get all the praise for it. I'm sorry. You remember when I said there's only one movie on here that I actually hate? Well, here we are. Shape of Water is a movie that I cannot stand. Thankfully, its fanbase isn't as bad as the fanbases towards the previous entries, at least not that I've seen. So then why is it this high? Well, because it falls into the other 3 categories for what I think makes a movie overrated. It's a movie that everyone praises, it's a movie that I think is garbage, and people give poor reasons for defending it. What are those reasons? Because the underwater sex scenes were done well. They don't say how they're done well, they just say that they're done well. Not only is it incredibly vague, but it's also hypocritical. Everyone complains about the kiss scene between Sonic and Elise in Sonic 06 because it's between a human and a hedgehog, and even call it bestiality, yet here we have actual bestiality for it actually implies that a woman wants to have sex with a fish thing. At least Sonic and Elise were still mammals, and at least with the Chinese singers in Christmas Story, while people for some reason feel the need to be much more forgiving towards it than they are with Disney, at least then someone can make the argument that Disney was just as guilty as Christmas Story was. Here, people literally praise this movie for doing what they complain about Sonic X Elise for, except 10 times worse. That's definitely a massive double standard if I've ever heard one. And the reason why people like this movie is actually the reason why I hate it so much. Because this movie actually features a woman stripping naked before getting into the water with this fish creature. I won't show it because I don't want to make us all need eye bleach, but trust me, they actually show it. It's like one of those weird hentai videos, except it's not even intended for fetish purposes. This is actually supposed to be taken seriously. And even if you do watch this movie for fetish purposes, this movie still isn't for you. Why? Because Sally Hawkins, the woman who played Eliza, was 41 years old at the time of this movie's release. That is too old to be sexualized. If there's one thing that disturbs me even more than seeing a child being sexualized, it's seeing an old lady being sexualized, especially if they show her naked. This is supposed to be taken seriously? That is just disgusting. And for months, it was the worst movie I've ever seen. It was so lucky that it was dethroned 5 months later by Rampage. So yeah, I think this movie is disgusting, I despise it with a passion, and I don't see why everyone loves it so much. Maybe there's more to it than the sex scenes were done correctly, but whatever those reasons are, they sure don't seem like they're doing a good job explaining them. Before we move on to number 1, I'm going to list off some honorable mentions. The Lego Movie. While I do think it's a good movie, I just couldn't enjoy it as much as most people because of how much of a verbally abusive brat Wildstyle is towards Emmett. I just want to punch her in the face every time she opens her mouth. Planet of the Apes. What saves this movie from being on here is the fact that I haven't seen it. But at the same time, I don't think I even want to see it because, as stated in the number 2 entry of my worst SpongeBob episodes list, I hate endings where the world is destroyed. I have a feeling this was done for the sake of an environmental message, but at the same time, it's the only part of the movie that anyone ever talks about. Austin Powers. To me, it seems to think that just making something inappropriate and disgusting automatically makes it funny. Next, we have the movie Elf. Definitely a Christmas classic that I much sooner watch every year than Christmas Story, but it gets an honorable mention because in the early 2010s, nearly every time I went to a Christmas party and they put a movie on, they almost always chose, you guessed it, this movie. Still love it though, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. On its own, it's not overrated, but what I do have a problem with is that I'm pretty sure this movie's existence is the only reason people hate the 2005 version because, oh boo-hoo, it's not this one. Over the Hedge. Yes, I associated this movie with being overrated, not underrated. A lot of people regard this as an underrated classic nowadays, and I just don't agree with that statement. Deadpool. Oh my gosh. This movie's fanbase might just be the most obnoxious movie fanbase I have ever seen. Everyone treats this movie like it's the absolute best movie ever made and that it's literally flawless, even though I could easily say that it's nowhere near flawless. Why do people make this claim? Because it spends a lot of time with self-aware humor. And to that, I say, where have you been for the last 10 years? Seriously, self-aware humor is not uncommon nowadays. I mean, I guess they mean that it does a better job at being self-aware than those movies do, but they still act like this is something completely unique to Deadpool and that self-aware humor hasn't been done before or since. And besides, I couldn't even remember most of this movie's instances of meta humor. All I can remember is how the movie spends way too much time making sex jokes, and thinking that all you need to do to entertain your audience is to make your sex jokes as disgusting as possible. And the worst part is that it somehow worked on a lot of people. So yeah, it is true that a lot of this movie's jokes involve self-aware humor, but the majority of the other jokes in it are just, ha ha, sex jokes be funny. As such, I found the first half of the movie pretty much unbearable. Keep in mind I said first half. I actually mostly enjoyed the second half, and it kept me from hating this movie even in spite of the fanboys really tempting me to. But it wasn't enough to undo the damage that the first half did to my brain. Remember in the Nostalgia Critic's Green Lantern review when he said that the fake Deadpool in his review was nowhere near as funny as the real Deadpool? Actually, that Deadpool seems like the perfect metaphor for how I feel about this movie's first half. But do you want to know what seals its fate at the top of my overrated movies list? Because people literally say that Deadpool could get away with doing anything, and they'd still praise him for it. Yep, anything that would be a problem in any other movie ever made is automatically okay because it's Deadpool. That alone makes it no longer a problem. That infuriates me. I've heard people act like blatant fanboys and treat movies like they're literally flawless, but this right here makes it sound like they genuinely believe that this movie is literally flawless, that it literally has no problems whatsoever, not even nitpicks. Heck, even when CinemaSins did their everything wrong with video of this movie, they ended it with a bonus round. Except this wasn't like most bonus rounds. This time, they actually felt the need to take off sins for every instance of this movie sinning itself. And yes, I know that CinemaSins once said that the sin counts have no real value. But to me, saying this was almost as bad as them not giving the movie any sins. Look, it's okay if you like this movie. And even if you regard it as your favorite movie, I don't exactly agree with that, but I understand it's your opinion. But implying that this movie literally doesn't have any faults whatsoever is where I draw the line. I personally regard Frozen as the best movie ever, much better than this, but I'm not afraid to admit to that movie's faults, and yet these guys are because they're too blinded to the notion that Deadpool is literally perfect in every single way. That is why, in my opinion, Deadpool is the most overrated movie ever made.